A warm welcome to today's African Forum event. Today's webinar topic is digital media, coups and power grabs in Africa, implications for leadership. My name is Anne Fitzgerald. I'm the director of the Balsillie School of International Affairs, and I'm very happy to be opening this important discussion and critical and timely event. And the Balsillie School is very pleased to be hosting the event with its institutional partner, the Center for International Governance Innovation, which is the co-host for the African Forum seminar series. I'd just like to start with a land acknowledgement and acknowledging the land on which the Balsillie School and the Center for International Governance Innovation is situated, where the venue of the event is taking place today. This land is known as the Haldeman Track. It spans 8 miles on either side of the Grand River. The land is the traditional territory of the Attawandaron, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee peoples. It's very important that we acknowledge this land on which we are situated in all we do, especially important events like the African Forum. So this is a very timely and important issue under discussion today. And just some fun facts, not so fun facts, actually, facts that we can start with. Out of at least 242 successful military coups that have occurred globally since 1950, Africa accounts for the largest number at 106. Since 2020, there have been 9 military coups on the continent, 7 of which have occurred over the past 3 years. This phenomena is also increasingly characterized by the prominent role of digital resources, which some refer to as an aspect of digital insurgency. This aspect combines also with a tremendous rise in the number of non-state groups participating in supporting these types of conflict, adding to the resource contingent. And of course, this contributes collectively to the further widening and globalization of conflict. So we're very excited to hear from our eminent panelists, who I will introduce now. So Dr. Nicodemus Minde is a researcher and academic specializing in peace, security, governance, and international relations in East Africa. He works with the East African Peace and Security and Governance Project at the Institute for Security Studies in Nairobi, Kenya. And the ISS is a very prominent institute on the continent. It not only has offices in Nairobi, but also in South Africa and elsewhere. He is an adjunct lecturer in international relations at the United States International University, Africa, based in Nairobi. Melaine Sakili is an economic policy analyst and development professional with deep expertise in policy and analysis, research, monitoring, and evaluation, and custom software engineering. Melaine was a researcher at the African Union and senior analyst in custom software engineering at Accenture in Mauritius, where he led projects in research, predictive analytics, and policy engagement. Currently, he serves as senior assessment officer and focal point for site management for Impact Initiatives Sudan mission, focusing on research for internally displaced populations. So Melaine plays a very important role sitting at the intersection of technology and policy, something that the Balsillie School and CG are very concerned with. Halima Ahmed is a peace, security, and development practitioner with experience in the Horn of Africa region, focusing on Sudan, South Sudan, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Somalia. She previously served as Peace, Security, and Development Early Career Fellow at the African Leadership Center, King's College, London University. Halima is currently pursuing a PhD in global governance at the Balsillie School. She focuses on areas of migration, citizenship, and identity crisis, and contributes as a researcher to the My Food networks. Abdi Issa is a PhD candidate at the Balsillie School. He will be the discussant for this event, and Diana English, Director of Program Management at the Center for International Governance Innovation, will moderate the Q&A. So I will now pass over to Diana to say a few words and open up the event by passing the baton to the first panelist. So Dr. Nicodemus Minde is a researcher and academic specializing in peace, security, governance, and international relations in East Africa. He works with the East African Peace and Security and Governance Project at the Institute for Security Studies in Nairobi, Kenya. And the ISS is a very prominent institute on the continent. It not only has offices in Nairobi, but also in South Africa and elsewhere. He is an adjunct lecturer in international relations at the United States International University, Africa, based in Nairobi. Melaine and Sakili is an economic policy analyst and development professional with deep expertise in policy and analysis, research, monitoring, and evaluation, and custom software engineering. Melaine was a researcher at the African Union and senior analyst in custom software engineering at Accenture in Mauritius, where he led projects in research, predictive analytics, and policy engagement. Currently, he serves as Senior Assessment Officer and focal point for site management for Impact Initiatives Sudan mission, focusing on research for internally displaced populations. So Melaine plays a very important role sitting at the intersection of technology and policy, something that the Balsillie School and CG are very concerned with. Halima Ahmed is a peace, security, and development practitioner with experience in the Horn of Africa region, focusing on Sudan, South Sudan, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Somalia. She previously served as Peace, Security, and Development Early Career Fellow at the African Leadership Center, King's College, London University. Halima is currently pursuing a PhD in global governance at the Balsillie School. She focuses on areas of migration, citizenship, and identity crisis, and contributes as a researcher to the My Food networks. Abdi Issa is a PhD candidate at the Balsillie School. He will be the discussant for this event, and Diana English, Director of Program Management at the Center for International Governance Innovation, will moderate the Q&A. So I will now pass over to Diana to say a few words and open up the event by passing the baton to the first panelist.
Thank you so much, Anne. And I will keep my opening remarks brief, just to say thank you so much to everybody for joining us today. Thank you so much for our panelists for joining. The CG Africa program is growing. So if you're interested in seeing additional policy briefs and research and work related to these topics, particularly related to the governance of digital and tech in an African context, then please check out our website, and we'll share some more resources in the chat in case that's something you're interested in following up on. But for now, very excited to have this panel together. And I believe we will be handing things over to Dr. Nicodemus Minde to kick us off with some initial remarks. Dr. Minde, over to you.
Thank you so much, and a very good morning to you. It's good evening from our end, and thank you so much for inviting me to this Africa Forum to discuss this very important and timely conversation around digital media, coups and power grabs in Africa, in our place. In terms of digital media, of course, we understand digital media as something that is transmitted through internet. And of course, most of it comes in the form of digital devices, electronic devices. And for me also, I thought it is also important for us to really understand the concept of a coup, which has actually been broadened in terms of its scope. So it's not just coups, because the earlier thinking about the concept of coups was problematic, and they thought it, the African Union and scholars thought it was important for it to be expanded. So actually the concept now is referred to as a constitutional change of government, and previous protocols and frameworks have attempted to really broaden the scope of what coups are. But I will mostly focus my analysis on the African Charter on Democracy and Good Governance and Article 23, which actually enumerates 5 criteria for what coups could be, or the unconstitutional change of government. And of course, the basic definition, of course, is a putsch or a coup d'etat against a democratically elected government. And of course, you also know number two, it's any intervention by a mercenary to replace a democratically elected government. But it was also, thirdly, it is any replacement of a democratically elected government by an armed dissident or rebels, or what we have actually currently seen in the past few years. And of course, there's also any attempt by the incumbent government not to relinquish power after it has lost an election. But lastly, we are also seeing a new dynamics where there is a change of or an amendment or a revision of the constitution to elongate in power. So these are some of these interesting new perspectives around what coups could constitute. But of course, I'm also hearing academics also speaking more broadly about attempts to increase the age limit of a certain candidate. For example, in Uganda, there's been an attempt to the constitutionally agreed age limit is this, but now within time, they want to really extend the age limit. But again, Anne Fitzgerald gives a very interesting dynamic statistics around coups that have happened in the African context in the past 2 decades or so. And since 2003 up to 2022, there have actually been about 20 successful coups, with the last being that one in Gabon in 2023 last year. And ironically, this was actually the 11th successful military coup in post-colonial Africa. That is the period between 1952 to 2003. And one of the things that really happens in coups is that coups beget coups. Coups are almost infectious in the sense that once this happens in this country, it can actually really be influence other countries to really get into coups. And we understand the general implications or the effects of coups. Of course, speaking it from the democratic lens, it actually perpetuates, but governance, it actually creates conditions for erosion of human rights and civic freedoms, but it also leads to conditions for future coups, or what we call counter coups. But again, mostly it is the aspect of undermining democracy, peace, security, and stability in the continent. And what actually I'm also really thinking more broadly about the causes of these coups, mostly there are a number of interesting facts. So there's no one fit all cause of a coup. Each country, they're very peculiar in their own nature. So in ISS, we've been able to really do specific researches to understand the origins or the causes of coups. And one of our conclusions was that these military coups or coups in general are very multifaceted in their approach. They're very unique to different countries and contexts. But one of the things that we really need to discuss, especially in this forum where we're looking at the interlink between digital media and coups, is that with the rise of the internet penetration in the continent, and I can give you a bit of statistics to just point to you in terms of numbers about have access to social media in the past 7 years. This is a big number, 400 million active social media users and 600 million internet users in the continent. So you can see this is actually some form of increase in digital penetration in the continent. With it, therefore, comes an aspect of disinformation. and the campaigns around disinformation, especially as a result of this digital media. I have to cancel that, okay? And several agencies and think tanks have actually looked at the causes of these sources of disinformation as a result of digital penetration. And we are seeing a lot of external factors, foreign state-sponsored disinformation from Russia, China, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, as primary sponsors of disinformation. And the net effect, if you look at these countries that I've mentioned, is an influence in the coups that have happened in the Sahel, especially in the last 2 or 3 years. And we see from studies and research that Russia actually continues to be one of the primary sponsors of disinformation in Africa, which actually really has an impact with the coups that have happened in Niger, in Chad, in Burkina Faso, in Guinea, and elsewhere. So we can see now, to just wrap up, because I know I'm going to come and speak later, what does that have an impact in the implications for leadership? We see there's a direct correlation between disinformation as a result of digital penetration and the coups that are happening in the continent. And we have been able to mention to you some of these actors in the form of external actors. Later on, I'm also going to speak more broadly to domestic actors. Thank you very much, Dr. Diana.
Thank you so much for those opening remarks, kicking us off well. Next, we'll go to Milan Nsakalia.
So thank you very much for the opportunity to be a co-panelist in this discussion. I would give my perspective, and I will begin also by thanking Dr. Minde for at least putting in place some sort of a framework upon which I can build. So in essence, the African continent has actually seen a surge of military coups we could say within the last decade, within the last 2 decades. If we go right back to the Arab Spring, Tunisia, Egypt, we can definitely say that digital media actually had a significant role in the organization and the subsequent ouster of some of these regimes. I use the word significant very conservatively because I cannot actually come out with estimates on the quantification of what the role of digital media was in the ouster of these regimes. But I do think that any close observer of some of these events would definitely say that digital media actually played a role. In Burkina Faso, of course, we would definitely say that. But I cannot really put a finger on the extent to which digital media had a role in some of the more surgical coups, like those that happened in Guinea-Conakry with the ouster of Alpha Condé, as well as the coup that happened in Burkina Faso with the ascendancy of Ibrahim Traoré. Nevertheless, we cannot underestimate the role of digital media in spreading information and in voicing out discontent and riling up the public and leading up to the ouster of some regimes. I would also go by the thesis that coups are not just power struggles, but definitely a reflection of deep-seated political, social, and economic issues within specific countries. And digital media actually amplifies these dynamics, posing challenges, both challenges and opportunities in essence for leadership. Challenges in the sense that if the leadership had taken a backseat as far as the challenges of the countries are concerned, they more often than not will be taken by surprise with the outburst of anger and the clarion call in some cases for the military to take over. But opportunities in the sense that if the leadership actually had a finger on some of the challenges within their countries, they will be much more proactive with the voicing out of anger to take drastic or immediate actions to lower the flares and actually bring the country back to bring their respective countries back to some sort of order. And as I was thinking about this topic, I actually thought of two particular books within which I could discuss this. One is Paul Collier's Wars, Guns, and Votes, Democracy in Dangerous Places. And the second is Christopher Bladman's Why We Fight, the Roots of War and the Paths to Peace. So in essence, digital media actually amplifies dissent. So if we take social media, Facebook, Twitter, for example, it serves as a platform for exposing corruption because it transcends the traditional media through which in the past a lot of discontent in the public was voiced out. In this day and age of digital media, every citizen can become a journalist and can actually point out with pictures and other types of evidence what is going on wrongly in the country, the malfeasance that is going on in their respective countries. Digital media also helps in mobilizing protest. The most recent example we could say the ouster of Omar al-Bashir in Sudan. We saw the massive use of Twitter to rally the citizens to the streets. And we'll not only say that digital media has contributed to coups, it has also contributed to policy reforms. This year, we actually saw the Kenyan Gen Zs go to the streets through organization on Twitter to call for changes or to call for the total rescinding of the tax law, which the parliament was about to sign and which the president was about to sign into law. So we can see the extent to which digital media can go to amplify dissent as well as to call policymakers back to order. Another point is leader narratives. Coups often use digital media to kind of legitimize themselves, portraying themselves as liberators of the corrupt and ineffective governments, and actually try as much as possible to table a totally different plan from what had obtained in their respective countries. Whether or not some of these calls, some of these labeling of themselves as liberators is true, is something that we definitely could subsequently discuss. And also, military leaders also capitalize on citizens' disillusionment with democracy in some cases, saying that there is a clarion call for strong citizenship and that democracies themselves actually weaken the nation and leave their nations vulnerable to both internal and external threats. Paul Collier actually highlights how weak democratic institutions in developing countries fail to deliver economic growth and security, hence making them susceptible to power grabs. For example, in Burkina Faso, first, when Damiba took power, he did mention that the security of the state was at stake, hence calling for the need for a coup d'etat. And when subsequently Ibrahim Traore took power, he cited the different security failures of the regime of Damiba as justification for why he decided to step in and seize power. On the other hand, Bladman actually argues that some of these coups are a result of people actually fight, and coups, which definitely he classifies as political violence, actually are a result of when peaceful solutions to specific countries' problems fail. And more often than not, these peaceful solutions or reasonable solutions to problems fail due to greed, grievance, and the lack of credible deterrence. So coups definitely stem from economic inequality, ethnic divisions, which Collier did say that countries are susceptible to coups as a result of a multiplicity of the ethnicities of those countries, not necessarily in essence because of that multiplicity, but because as diverse as a country becomes, investments to public, returns to public investments actually dwindle. Hence the need for more private investments. But this is definitely not what obtains in most of African countries, or these countries which are prone to coup, because these countries tend to have bigger governments, and usually there is patronage to maybe the president's tribe or a select group of elite, hence creating some sort of discontent within the population and leading to the calls for the military, more often than not, the rank and file of the military to take over power. So what are the implications for leadership? Legitimacy. Leaders face actually erosion of public trust due to unchecked digital narratives. So not only does digital media create a forum for the exposition or for malfeasance within the state apparatus to be exposed, there is also another dynamic to it which could be catastrophic for different states, because there is actually the propagation of what most will make reference to as misinformation, things that are not just there or facts that are misrepresented. It also creates policy disruption. Coups destabilize reforms in different sectors, security, healthcare, and education, because at every state, every point in time, each regime actually comes with, more often than not, an overhaul of the prevailing system or the status quo. What are the opportunities for leadership? Proactive leadership. If leaders actually lead one step at a time, anticipating problems and thinking about possible solutions for those problems, then these are some of the opportunities that digital media actually brings forward. The use of digital tools, for example, to communicate transparently, build trust, and counteract information. In many cases, there are instances where public policy has actually been implemented and it is delivering results, but the lack of an attempt or the lack of a strategy to properly communicate via the use of digital media, especially to the youth who take most of their news from the digital media, actually makes it difficult and could create a discontent, which is not just there because what is being done has not been communicated, and the dynamics through which different policy reforms or policy proposals could achieve their desired outcomes hasn't been properly communicated. Another opportunity also is strengthening of institutions. Strengthening of, just 1 minute and I'll round up, strengthening of institutions. So digital media actually provides opportunity in addressing systemic corruption and inequality, as some of these things are exposed, as recommended by Collier, to reduce susceptibility to coups. So a strong institutional framework, for example, we could quote Rwanda, even though most of its reforms have actually come at the cost of democratic freedoms. So I would say Africa's leadership definitely must embrace a hybrid approach, strengthening institutions to guard against coups while harnessing digital media to foster inclusive governance. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for those enlightening words. We really appreciate it. I particularly am a fan of Professor Blattman's work, so glad to hear your reflections on his writing as well. We'll hand it over to our final panelist, Halima Ahmed, before Abdi Issa will also facilitate some conversation together and then move to audience Q&A. Halima?
Thank you so much, Diana, and thank you to the Balsillie School, CEGI, and the Africa Forum altogether. Thank you to my fellow panelists as well, Dr. Minde and Melaine. I don't know what else to say. I feel like they've covered pretty much every base. But just top of my mind, I think I like to think about digital media with regards to Africa as a double-edged sword of some sort. Just to piggyback most of the ideas, I think we can also say that digital media could be looked at from a dual nature sort of perspective. And this is because in light of Africa as the continent that we're looking at today, and with all the coups that have gone on in the recent modern history past, I think digital media is fundamentally altering the power dynamics of leadership and governance across the continent. It's, one would say, even a transformative era of some sort, where platforms like X, which is formerly Twitter, WhatsApp, TikTok, they've all sort of evolved into this critical tool for mobilization, for narrative framing, for power consolidation. And we've seen in the continent that these platforms have been extremely pivotal in organizing coups, or especially during coups, if I could put it that way, in uprisings, like in the case of Sudan in 2019, in contentious political transitions, case in point, Kenya. And while Kenya obviously has yet to experience a military coup in its modern history, the political climate is fueled by mass protests. And we saw this in June of this year. It's still ongoing, but in June 2024 was the height of the mass protests across the nation. And they were dubbed as Ruto must go protests, or the financial bill 2024 demonstrations and protests. And a lot of political analysts even said that these protests that were going on in Kenya at the time are still going on. There's still talks about, ensuring that the current regime leaves office, somewhat signals, a nation that is edging towards, some sort of a political shift. So the dual nature of digital media, I think, could be seen from two perspectives: from an empowerment and mobilization perspective, and from a manipulation and control perspective. So just as my fellow panelists have put it, I think the empowerment and mobilization area or perspective could be looked at as, an area where the citizenry, or the African citizens across the continent, have used digital media as, or rather, digital media has in one way democratized information access. Citizens have used this as a tool to document injustices, mobilize protests, demand reforms. And I think a very important research area or a case study would have been Sudan in 2019 during its revolution, where the hashtag Sudan Uprising garnered, I think it was about 10 or 11 or 10 to 15 million interactions, which, courtesy of this, it drew a lot of global and continental support and attention. We can also see it from a manipulation and control perspective, just as my fellow panelists had put it, where political elite, political class, political actors, however one would like to put it, exploit digital platforms. And this is seen in ways such as spreading misinformation, silencing dissent, manipulating public perception. And I think even in Kenya, we've seen the manipulation and control go as far as, the political regime, the current political regime, sort of drive out the opposition or contribute to misinformation towards the opposition. back to the Ruto must go protests in Kenya. And I highlight it not because it's a coup of some sort, but it's because digital media was used heavily in the protests as a warning signal and in a shift of power dynamics of some sort. So in as much as, yes, Kenya hasn't experienced a coup per se, the political atmosphere is quite tense. And it continues to remain tense. And the protests against the president, his regime, the current government has gone on over the high cost of living, the corruption, the rampant corruption, the contentious bills, they keep sliding it under the rug, And Kenyans have taken to Twitter and TikTok specifically with the slogans of Ruto must go, with videos and tweets and TikToks receiving millions of views, showcasing police brutality and grassroots resistance. And we even went as far as witnessing or experiencing a situation on the 25th of June where the government what do we call it? Shut down the internet and feigned that the digital, not the digital, but the internet cables were cut off or some sort of issue happened. But they even went as far as paying off the major national telecommunication company to shut down telecommunications. So calls and phones couldn't go through, text couldn't go through for a time. And it was the first time I think Kenya was witnessing this in modern history, if I can put it that way. But at the same time, the opposition leader at the time, Raila, leveraged the digital platforms as well to frame the protests as a fight for democracy, which in turn also didn't really, go his way because the opposition ended up merging with the government at the end of the day. So the narrative and the power dynamics here is seen in a way where Kenya experienced, I would say, localized internet disruptions and reports of selective blocking of hashtags on Twitter and on TikTok, and accounts of critical government for accountability and so on and so forth. I think we could go on and on. I could mention highlights in Mali, in Chad, in Sudan, but I think the two major areas I would say that shape leadership in the continent with regards to digital media is the power of narrative control and the transnational impact. The transnational impact in the context of, I guess, the continent's diasporas, amplifying local struggles through digital platforms, which for Kenya, I think the diaspora groups in the US and the UK, across Europe, extensively shared relative content and issues that were ongoing at the time, that are still ongoing, about the protests and pressuring international stakeholders to address, governance issues. So other than, ensuring that the leadership strategies evolve, like Dr. Minde had mentioned, and, policies that are put in place with regards to cyber governance, digital media, whether we like it or not, is reshaping Africa's political landscape. It's influencing governance and leadership in profound ways. And in as much as these platforms empower citizens to challenge authoritarianism and demand accountability, they are equally vulnerable to exploitation by leaders seeking, I guess one could put it as a way to consolidate power. But as a continent, just to wrap it up, I think the continent navigates this digital age and the challenge that lies in leveraging these platforms for transparency and empowerment, all while, I would say, mitigating the risks of manipulation and authoritarian control.
Thank you very much. I extend my gratitude to you, Halima, and to all three panelists for kicking us off with such interesting interventions. I'm going to hand things over to Abdi to be a bit of a discussant, ask some additional questions. We'll give about 10 minutes for this, and then I would also invite for those of you in the audience to use the Q&A function to start entering any questions that you have for the panelists. And at about 10 till we can sort of check in and see what questions we have from the audience as well. Abdi, over to you.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you so much, colleagues, for those very insightful and very comprehensive discussion on the role of coups in social media. I think it's a very timely and policy-relevant discussion, given the state of the world that we're in, in a world that's very much in flux, in a year where most of the continents and most of the world and the citizenries are going to elections as well. And in a year, we're starting to realize the transformative power that technology and digital social medias have. I think the colleagues really stress some key takeaway with Derminde, who mentioned most notably that coups are contagious. And we saw this across the coup belts in sub-Saharan Africa, not only from Sudan, but across Chad, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Guinea. And has manifested itself in many other parts of the continent, across Central and Southern Africa. And although we haven't seen unconstitutional changes of government too many times this year, we have seen social media play an important role in the elections in Senegal, in the elections in Mozambique, and the elections elsewhere, and even currently in Somaliland as we see. Thank you so much, panelists, and thank you so much, audience members, for joining us for this Africa Forum event. We look forward to seeing you for the next one.